NATO's chief scolds alliance member countries for failing to deliver timely aid promised to Ukraine.
We have to be honest and we have to realize that when we don't deliver, when we delay supplies, it's about life and death. It has real consequences.
Plus, the U.S. accuses China of perpetuating the war in Ukraine by supporting Russia's rapid arms production while claiming it wants the war to end.
At the very time that Russia is seeking better relations with countries in Europe, it's also fueling the greatest challenge to European security since the end of the Cold War. And as I shared with my Chinese colleagues, you can't have it both ways.
And later in the program, the Ukrainian Grandpa, who is leading an over-60s unit fighting Russia. Today is Monday, April 29th. From the Voice of America, this is Flashpoint Ukraine.
Thank you for coming.
Good evening, I'm Lori London. In a joint news conference with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg, in an unannounced visit to Kyiv Monday, acknowledged that his alliance's members have failed to live up to their promises of military aid in recent months.
And this has had serious consequences on the battlefield. The lack of ammunition has enabled the Russians to push forward along the front line. Lack of air defense has made it possible for more Russian missiles to hit their targets. And lack of deep strike capabilities has made it possible for the Russians to concentrate more forces. And we see the consequences of that now.
With the U.S. Congress now having approved a Ukraine aid package worth more than $60 billion and an announcement last week by British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak of a record-high commitment to Kyiv, Stoltenberg said alliance members now have a critical responsibility to ensure the announcements are turned into actual deliveries as soon as possible.
We have to be honest and we have to realize that when we don't deliver, when we delay supplies, it's about life and death. It has real consequences. This war is not a kind of theoretical thing. It's something that's going on 24/7. And when we are not delivering as we should, then the Ukrainians are paying the price. But it's also us, as all NATO allies, because, of course, it has a cost to ensure that Ukraine prevails. And there's always a risk when you are engaged in conflicts like Ukraine is now. But the biggest risk is if President Putin prevails and if President Putin wins. And the biggest cost is if Russia wins in Ukraine.
In his third wartime visit to Kyiv, Stoltenberg said all allies are looking into what more they can do, and he does expect even more announcements coming soon. As Russian forces continue to exploit battlefield advantages, Ukraine's army chief is warning of a worsening situation as Ukrainian troops wait for the much-needed arms to reach combat zones. We're joined by Anna Chernikova in Kyiv, who says Ukrainian forces had to pull back in several locations, particularly in the eastern frontline areas around Avdiivka over the weekend.
The situation on the ground sounds like it's still really active and difficult. Russian troops have been making advances in some strategic areas. What can you tell us?
Absolutely right. Despite this, growing hope and positive emotions, as U.S. aid was finally approved, still Ukrainian forces, they're still waiting for the aid to arrive. And at this point, the situation on the front line is quite difficult. And on Sunday, the head of the Ukrainian army, Mr. Syrskyi, confirmed that Ukrainian forces had to withdraw from certain positions in the eastern part of the front line around Avdiivka as Russian forces continue a certain advance. And the territory is not big, but still certain strategic points where Ukrainian forces were staying for some time. They had to withdraw from there, and Russian forces are currently taking a couple of villages under their control. The situation is extremely tough, and Syrskyi is reporting that actually there are still quite a big lack of ammunition and manpower as well. But at this point, we can see that international experts, particularly Institute for the Study of War, who also confirmed that Ukrainian forces had to withdraw from there, are still saying that it looks like that when aid is coming, Ukrainian forces will be able to stabilize the line at that part of the front, and also that at this point they do not see any prospect for Russian forces to get more advance or any more of significant advance. So the situation remains extremely tough, but it looks like that still at this point both sides are getting to the positions that they are able to take under control.
When you say Russian troops are making advances, are Ukrainian forces pulling back? Or is it a battle? Or are they just knowing they're undermanned and so they're pulling back?
There are battles going on, but Ukrainian forces are withdrawing from certain areas in order to save lives and lives of the soldiers, and in order to save all the weapons and all the ammunition, because as I already mentioned, the lag is very high.
Turning to another very tragic story, we understand 2 Ukrainian soldiers that were wounded in the fighting and getting treatment in Germany have been killed. What happened?
Yeah, so over the weekend, information emerged about 2 Ukrainian citizens killed in Germany. Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs confirmed that those Ukrainian citizens were wounded soldiers who were undergoing the rehabilitation treatment. And some time later, German police confirmed that they arrested a person accused of killing those Ukrainian soldiers who turned to be a Russian citizen. So at this point, both Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well as German police confirmed that this person is under arrest and further investigation is ongoing.
As we talked about in the beginning of the conversation, you mentioned people feeling hopeful. Is that the overall mood now? Has it shifted a bit from feeling, that despair of not having aid and not being able to survive to, has it changed now since the U.S. Congress voted to provide the aid?
For the past couple of months, Ukrainian society was getting more and more feeling of fear of the upcoming Russian assault, which everyone is talking about should apparently start and happen in the beginning of summer. And also people were kind of scared that U.S. might not approve the aid and might abandon Ukraine and Ukrainians at one point. But then finally the aid was approved. And of course, it's much more hope now, and not only within the society, but also at the front line within the soldiers, because what Ukrainian soldiers are saying that they definitely not gonna stop fighting, and they will fight until the very end. But now they will have what to fight with. They will have the equipment and ammunition.
Anna Chernikova reporting for us from Kyiv. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Laurie.
So just how soon could things turn around for Ukraine following last week's announcement of the long-awaited U.S. military aid package? VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb has this report.
U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin announced the Pentagon's largest defense package for Ukraine to date. $6 billion worth of additional weapons from the U.S. defense industry.
You can rest assured that we're going to move as fast as we can to get them the capability, as fast as industry can produce.
Ukraine waited months for Congress to approve new U.S. aid amid setbacks from Russian forces. Brad Bowman is Senior Director of the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies.
They've been gaining ground, and the Ukrainians have been losing ground, retreating at times because they had no choice, rationing their munitions because they didn't have enough.
A focal point of the U.S.-led Ukraine Defense Contact Group's discussions on Friday. VOA spoke with General C.Q. Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, at the briefing following the contact group's discussions.
When do you think that Ukrainians will have the opportunity to again have the upper hand?
Can't necessarily predict a timeline of where, for the future of where the Ukrainians will have an upper hand, but we can shape the future. I think there's some near-term effect because now the Ukrainians don't necessarily have to ration what they have because they know things are coming out of this package, and there will be follow-on packages because of the supplemental.
The $6 billion package dips into the $61 billion supplemental aid bill that President Joe Biden signed into law on Wednesday. The package includes air defense interceptors and artillery systems and munitions. Austin would not say if the package included more of the long-range ballistic missiles known as ATACMS, but he did confirm Ukrainians now have the capability, nearly doubling the striking distance of their artillery.
It's up to them on how and when to use it, and our hopes are that they'll create some pretty good effects.
Analyst Brad Bowman has called for the U.S. to send Ukraine ATACMS since 2022.
The delay has been deeply unfortunate and has had consequences on the battlefield, as many of these delays have had. but it's incredibly positive that those have been sent. The Ukrainians have already used them to great effect, but they need more.
Officials had cited concerns that the loss of ATACMS from the American stockpile would hurt U.S. military readiness. Secretary Austin told VOA that stockpile shortages are no longer an issue because the U.S. has acquired more missiles. Carla Babb, VOA News, the Pentagon.
Australia has also announced a military aid package for Ukraine worth around $65 million. The Canberra government is one of the largest non-NATO donors to Kyiv's war effort following Russia's invasion that began in February 2022. We hear more from Phil Mercer in Sydney.
Australia's military aid package includes funding for drones, short-range air defence systems, inflatable boats and generators, as well as equipment like helmets, masks and boots. The additional funding was announced by Australia's Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles during a brief visit over the weekend to Ukraine. Marles told local media that the Canberra government is committed to supporting Ukraine to resolve the conflict on its own terms, adding that their spirit remains strong. Australia is also part of a multinational programme to train Ukrainian troops in the United Kingdom through Operation Kudu. Canberra has also joined the UK-led so-called Drone Coalition to boost Ukraine's aerial defences. Vasyl Moroshnichenko is Ukraine's ambassador to Australia. He told the Australian Broadcasting Corporation that Australia's help will make a difference in his country's fight against Russia.
We're extremely grateful for the package that was announced and the fact that Australia joined the Drone Coalition, especially now that we see how the nature of war is changing. The role of drones is becoming more important, and we have to have a steady supply of those drones. And that was a very important contribution from Australia to help us get that advantage on the battlefield.
The new package brings Australia's overall financial support to Ukraine to more than $650 million. Previous aid included supplying armoured vehicles, infantry carriers, lightweight towed howitzers and munitions. Australia's announcement follows a $61 billion military aid package for Ukraine signed last week by US President Joe Biden. The Canberra government also has imposed restrictions on hundreds of Russian politicians, including President Vladimir Putin, military commanders and business people. They are the most sweeping sanctions Australia has ever put on another country. Additionally, Canberra has banned imports of Russian oil, petroleum, coal and gas. More than 11,000 Ukrainians on various types of Australian visas, including visitors' permits, have come to Australia since Russia invaded in February 2022. Phil Mercer, VOA News, Sydney.
Meanwhile, at a World Economic Forum discussion in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia Monday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said China is enabling Russia's rapid production of military equipment, which is perpetuating the war in Ukraine.
If you look at what Russia's done over the last year in terms of its production of munitions, missiles, tanks, and armored vehicles, it's produced them at a faster pace than at any time in its modern history, including during the Cold War as the Soviet Union. How has it been able to do that? Because it's getting massive inputs of machine tools, microelectronics, optics, mostly coming from China. 70% of the machine tools, 90% of the microelectronics are coming from China. Now, these are dual-use items, but we know very clearly where so many of them are going.
Blinken met with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Friday and raised U.S. concerns about China's support for Russia.
I think as important, maybe more important, they're hearing this from European countries. I've talked to a number of European leaders about this in recent weeks, including, for example, President Macron in France, and I know the deep concern that Europeans have about this support for the defense industrial base in Russia, because, again, this poses a threat to Europe's security, not only Ukraine, but all of Europe.
China's foreign ministry said the U.S. position on Chinese defense trade with Russia was hypocritical when considered alongside the amount of military assistance Washington is providing to Kyiv. You're listening to VOA's Flashpoint Ukraine. I'm Lori London. 38 years after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, hundreds of people still work to dismantle the long-defunct power plant and control the contaminated exclusion zone, a 30-kilometer area surrounding it. Reporter Lizha Bakalets traveled there and has the story of one man who still works there nearly 4 decades after living through the tragedy.
The silence can be heard in what's known as the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Human activity almost completely stopped here 38 years ago. That emptiness has let nature take over.
Working in the Chernobyl exclusion zone is a dubious pleasure, as visitors usually say, but we, the employees, like it. It's quiet and calm here.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy calls the zone simply home. He spent his childhood and youth here, in the now ghost city of Pripyat.
This used to be my apartment, first floor. These are bedroom windows. The living room was on the other side of the building.
Pripyat is located 2 kilometers from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. When the explosion of reactor number 4 happened on April 26, 1986, the city was evacuated for 2 days. Verbitsky was a young engineer at the nuclear plant back then.
It was a weekend. I read in the kitchen until night. Around 4 a.m., the postwoman came. She said that something had happened at the station, and I had to be at work in the morning.
The International Atomic Energy Agency later said Chernobyl was a level 7 major disaster, the most serious on its scale. In the immediate aftermath, 31 people died, and 600,000 who took part in firefighting and cleanup efforts received high doses of radiation.
I saw that there was simply no reactor. As specialists, we understood that this was a total disaster.
Then Volodymyr was told that he was not needed at the station yet, so he stayed home and instead helped his wife and son evacuate.
We were told we needed to leave the city just for 2 or 3 days. Later, doctors checked my son and said that his radiation dose was 2 times above the adult norms.
Within a month, Verbitsky was called back to the power plant. He worked there for another year and then transferred to the exclusion zone, the 30-kilometer area around the Chernobyl plant with the highest level of radiation contamination.
In Ukraine, in the initial period, 96 towns and villages were resettled. Approximately 150,000 people evacuated.
Volodymyr shows how the zone is still extremely polluted.
От зараз поясніть, що зараз, що ці цифри означають?
Do you see? The level of exposure is increasing. 1.37 or 1.42 microsievert is 5 times higher than what is allowed in Ukraine, than the norm.
Volodymyr lost track of his visits to the zone. It is still his place of work today. He survived a second evacuation from here in 2022 when Russians occupied the plant at the start of the full-scale invasion. Lizha Bakalets, VOA News, Chernobyl.
Men, women, and even seniors are stepping up. Reuters reporter Cheryl Pena has the story of a Ukrainian grandpa who's leading an over-60s unit fighting Russia.
Alexander Taran's mobile artillery unit isn't officially part of Ukraine's military, but that hasn't stopped his men from destroying Russian targets. We get by thanks to the pension fund, says the 68-year-old commander, whose call sign is Grandpa. The all-volunteer unit called the Steppe Wolves is comprised of dozens of Ukrainian men, mostly over 60 years old, who are considered too old to be drafted, but still want to fight for their country. The unit also includes younger men who have been ruled unfit to fight. Roving behind enemy lines with truck-mounted rocket launchers, they take orders from field commanders and work with other troops despite lacking official support from the military. The unit is funded by donations and is stocked with faulty rounds they repair themselves, as well as weapons captured from the enemy. So far, efforts to officially integrate into the military have been unsuccessful, Taran said. During a recent visit by Reuters to their base in the southeastern Zaporizhia region, they were seen preparing rocket rounds later fired by troops from another unit. This 63-year-old volunteer fighter goes by the call sign Zorro.
The commanders that provide us with targets are happy. They give us more targets and help us with ammunition however they can. We move out and help them.
Ukraine's mobilization effort is struggling amid flagging enthusiasm more than 2 years into Russia's full-scale invasion. With Russian troops making progress in the east, analysts say Ukraine's shortage of manpower needs to be addressed. Earlier this month, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy approved new measures allowing the military to call up more troops and strengthen penalties for evasion. He also reduced the mobilization age from 27 to 25. Tehran, who has been fighting since 2014, said coercion would be unlikely to beat genuine enthusiasm from a potential recruit. Beat him with a stick if you want, but he won't fight, he says.
That was Cheryl Pena with Reuters reporting. And the Ukrainian version of a famous video game Minecraft features Canadian actress Catherine Winnick, U.S. astronaut Scott Kelly, and many other celebrities from around the globe. The new game, called Mine Salt, is based on Ukraine's famous Soledar salt mine. Anna Kostuchenko has the story.
The Soledar salt mines in Ukraine once attracted tourists who could spend hours exploring the vast underground caverns. That was until the war. The mine shut down in early 2023, but United 24, the official fundraising platform of Ukraine, wanted people to continue to explore their beauty and history.
Коли був окупований Соледар,
When Russia occupied Soledar in February 2023, we immediately started thinking about projects that can tell the city's story and remind the world about our unique salt mines, about Ukraine fighting for each of its cities.
про те, що Україна бореться за кожне своє місто.
Thanks to the effort, the salt mines are virtually accessible to Minecraft players. The spin-off includes 16 locations and offers a quiz that players can complete for a chance to win prizes, explains Grace.
The Mine Salt world created in Minecraft is dedicated to Soledar. To win, you need to listen carefully to the stories you hear during your online journey. By the end, you need to collect crystals.
Mine Salt ambassadors help players throughout the game. Among them are celebrities like Canadian TV star of Ukrainian origin Catherine Winnick, Virgin Group founder Richard Branson, Nobel Prize winner Paul Nurse, actor Misha Collins, boxer Alexander Usyk, football player Alexander Zinchenko, Ukrainian actress Ivana Sarno, and former NASA astronaut Scott Kelly.
There's a lot of hidden places in the salt mines, right? And you'd be in there looking for crystals, right? And the kids would learn the history of Soledar and its mines.
Kelly has been engaged with the effort to help Ukraine for almost 2 years. He visited the Ahmadi Children's Hospital in Kyiv. He has also pledged over $500,000 he received from the sale of his NFT collection called Dreams Out of This World.
I said it was the 5th most meaningful trip I've ever taken, but that's only because I've flown in space 4 times.
To recreate the mines in the game, developers spoke to people like Stepan Bandrivsky, who worked for Artemsil, the company that ran the mine.
There were tours for tourists through the mines. They accommodated soccer matches and inflation of a hot air balloon, an event included in the Guinness Book of Records.
When the game developers approached him, he saw it as a unique opportunity to show his former workplace to his 6-year-old daughter.
When Ukraine is liberated, we will return because it's our home.
Mindsalt players can use a special QR code to send money to Ukrainian schools. United 24 coordinators say over 100,000 was raised in the week after the game's release. The funds will be used to restore a school in the Dnipro region destroyed by a Russian missile. Anna Kostuchenko for VOA News, Kyiv, Ukraine.
And that'll do it for us today. Stay up to date with continuing coverage on Ukraine and news from around the world, 24 hours a day at voanews.com. And on social media, follow VOA News. On behalf of all of us here at VOA, thank you for listening. Until next time, I'm Lori London.